Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I'm Charlie Smith, the Executive Director of ESIG. I want to welcome you to our monthly webinar series and give you a little bit of background on ESIG. For those of you not familiar with ESIG, we are a global membership-based nonprofit organization providing our members with objective information, resources, and networking opportunities in support of renewable energy and energy systems integration decisions. We do this through workshops, tutorials, webinars, blogs, working groups, and task force activities, and producing technical resource materials. I also serve in a leadership role with the Global Power System Transformation Consortium, or GPST, whose mission is to bring together key actors to catalyze a rapid, clean energy transition at unprecedented scope and scale. ESIG leads one of the 5 pillars which deals with the research agenda for the system operators. More information on the GPST can be found at globalpst.org. We're quite busy going into the summer season, having just finished up our spring technical workshop and going into our meteorology and markets workshop at the beginning of June. Our workshops and monthly webinars are open to everyone, so please feel free to register anytime on the ESIG website. If you're new to ESIG, I strongly encourage you to follow up with us if you like what you hear, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. You can find us on the web at esig.energy, as well as on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. Okay, just a few logistical matters before we get started. First of all, phones will be muted for the duration of the webinar to avoid unnecessary distractions. For the Q&A, we have moved to the Slido platform, and we're asking you to ask your questions through Slido at slido.com. You will not be able to ask your questions through WebEx, so go to slido.com and enter ESIG17, ESIG17, as the event code. The instructions are also at the bottom of the screen. You'll see a thumbs up button next to the questions to allow you to cast a vote to help prioritize the questions submitted. We plan to save around 20 minutes for Q&A at the end and then wrap it up at the top of the hour. An email with a link will be provided once the video file has been posted. We also plan to provide short responses to unanswered questions after the webinar, so please don't be afraid to ask your questions through Slido. Okay, so today's topic will feature one aspect of a project called Open Networks within the Energy Networks Association of Great Britain. And that aspect is extracting flexibility from DER. This topic has been receiving a lot of attention lately, both in Europe and the US, and after the presentation, I think you'll know why. I think those of you who are following FERC Order 2222 in the US will find it particularly interesting. The webinar will feature Farina Farrier, who is presently heading the Open Networks project, and Randolph Brazier, the Director of Innovation and Electricity Systems, both of whom are at the Energy Networks Association in GB. Farina works closely with the network operators, stakeholders, government, and industry in defining, planning, and managing the project. Randolph leads teams looking at innovation, resilience, and networks, including the Open Networks project. The project was launched in 2017 and is laying the foundation for a smart, flexible energy system in Great Britain. It has introduced real momentum into the transition to distribution system operation and is playing a key role in boosting flexibility markets and enabling DER to participate in them. I feel very fortunate to have Farina and Randolph here with us today. Just a short reminder once again to use Slido at slido.com with the event code of ESIG17 to ask your questions. And without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Farina, I will now turn it over to you.
Charlie. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure for us to be talking to you about the Open Networks project and our work on flexibility. So just before we start, I think some of you may be familiar with the Energy Networks Association. We're basically the trade association that represents electricity and gas networks in the UK and in Ireland. And as you can see here, our membership includes electricity distribution and transmission companies, as well as gas distribution and transmission. We also have the national system operator as one of our members. I think the one thing probably worth noting about the networks in the UK is that they are unbundled from supply and generation. In terms of the network itself, we have over 30 gigawatts of distributed generation that's currently connected. And this is something that is set to increase in the coming years, particularly as we start to see more EVs on the road. So before we go on and talk about the project, I think I always kind of like to set the context a little bit with the challenge. So as you know, we are facing unprecedented change. So we are in the midst of an energy revolution, and that's mainly driven, which are decarbonization, digitalization, and decentralization. So the networks have traditionally aligned as one-way power systems with large generators sitting at higher voltage levels. But basically, like as we are starting to see more decentralization and more renewables connecting at lower voltage levels, there is a need for the system to become more smart and flexible. So some of you may know UK has committed to net zero by 2050. So becoming that smart and flexible energy system is more urgent than ever now. So the networks are at the heart of delivering decarbonization, and this change is exactly what's kind of driving the Open Networks project. So in light of the challenges and the opportunities that are presented in the industry today, the Open Networks project was set up back in 2017. So the project's essentially looking at how the networks need to change the way they operate to become that smart and flexible energy system. So through the work that we've done over the last 5 years, we've introduced real momentum into this transition. So through the work that we're doing, like we are helping to open up local flexibility markets. We're helping renewables connect faster to the network. And we're also helping to kind of deliver that at lowest cost by delivering efficiencies between network companies. So I think the one thing I want to flag here is that in the project, we are taking a learn by doing approach. So what we mean by that is we are using innovation projects here in the UK to test various aspects of the work that we do in open networks. So in terms of the areas of focus, so broadly speaking, our work is it can broadly be categorized into 6 different areas. So as I mentioned on the previous slide, our work is very much focused on looking at that transition that's needed to become smart and flexible. So we have an area of work that's dedicated to looking at the transition to DSO. And, as part of that, we have a number of other areas of work that support that transition. So one of those areas is flexibility services, but there are other areas of work that we look at in the project as well. So I think the focus of our discussions today is on flexibility services, but I will kind of just broadly outline some of the other areas of work as they enable those flexibility services to be delivered. In open networks, the approach that we take is one of collaboration. So as we are the trade association, we've got membership from all across the country. So we make sure that, through the work that we are doing, we collaborate not just with the networks, but also with the wider industry as well. So the focus of the work that we do in open networks is helping to bring an element of standardization, also helping to simplify processes, and then to bring more transparency and fairness as we progress in this transition. So our work on flexibility services, so that's one of our largest areas of work in the project. It's also one of our areas of highest priority. So the scope is mostly focused on looking at local flexibility markets, and the objectives are to help develop transparency and standardized approaches across the DNOs, and also to start looking at the national system operator, which we refer to as the ESO, and start looking at delivering consistency with them as well. Um, our work also focuses on enabling new markets and platforms for flexibility. So we are starting to look at elements of peer-to-peer trading in the project. And also one of our objectives in this particular area of work is to help reduce the reliance of flexible connections and active network management contracts. So basically enabling people with a flexible connection to participate in flexibility markets. So in terms of the different products that we've got scoped for this year. So we've got 9 of them. So these are the ones that you can see here in the diagram. I won't call out all of them, but at a high level, like each of these products kind of focuses on a different area within the flexibility procurement process. So we've got an overarching product that looks at the procurement process itself. So over the last few years, we've done quite a lot of work to help bring in standardization there. So a couple of years ago, we defined common flexibility services that all of the DNOs are now procuring. This year, we're looking at that end-to-end procurement process, and we're looking at how we can we can align timescales across the different network companies, and also look at whether or not there's the opportunity to align the timescales with some of the national markets for flexibility as well. Then we've got another product that we call our common evaluation methodology and tool. So this is basically a methodology that we've developed that helps us assess traditional solutions such as reinforcement against flexibility options. So it helps to evaluate which option is the best one to meet a particular network need. We've also done some work to come up to basically like develop a common contract for flexibility services. So this common contract is what all the DNOs in Britain are using to provide flexibility services. We are planning to build on that contract, and what we are looking to do is kind of align that with this. So we are planning to publish a version of that in August. And then the other two boxes that we have here are basically looking at other aspects of flexibility services. So with our work on baselining services, we are looking to come up with a design for how we measure the provision of these services. And then we're also planning to do some work that's kicking off in the next couple of months to look at how we can coordinate flexibility services across T&D. And then the boxes on the right-hand side, as I mentioned earlier, so they're basically looking at how we can reduce reliance on flexible connections and give them more opportunities to participate in flexibility markets. And then the dotted box at the bottom, it reflects the work that we've kicked off this year to look at peer-to-peer trading. So a lot done traditionally in our project has focused on services that are directly procured by the DSO. So this year we are starting to look at how we can enable non-DSO services such as sharing of capacity. So there is a link here at the bottom of the slides that kind of it's our work plan for this year. So that's where we've defined all of the products, and that's where you can find further details on our work. I'll just move on to the next few slides to um, just kind of set out some of the other areas of work we're doing as well. So we have another work stream that's specifically focusing on a whole electricity system approach. So this work stream is all about kind of improving that coordination across transmission and distribution. So through the work that we've done over the years in this work stream, we're looking at optimizing existing processes and looking at how we can improve data exchange across the transmission and distribution boundary. And this year, we're also starting to look at how we can improve the visibility of distributed energy resources for the purposes of operational planning. And also, we're starting to look at how we can share some of that data with non-network stakeholders who may be interested in it. Then in terms of customer connection, so in previous years, we've done quite a lot of work to help standardize the connections process across all of the different DNOs that we have. We've delivered best practice in the last few years. So this year we are continuing to deliver improvements to the connections process and then identifying further opportunities for consistency. I think one of the key things in terms of our scope for this year is the embedded capacity register. So this is something that we developed in previous years. It's a register that contains information about DER that's connected to the network. So it has information about import export capacity, whether or not those resources are providing any flexibility services, or what type of technology those are. So this is something that's publicly available in a common format that all of the DNOs update on a monthly basis. So at the moment, this register has information for assets that are larger than 1 megawatt. But this year, we are looking at how we can lower that threshold and even potentially go down to 50 kilowatts. And then in terms of our work on the TSO transition itself, so we've got a separate work stream that looks at this, and this work stream has a slightly different focus to the other work streams. So this one kind of takes that longer term and more strategic view. So what we have published this year is something that we call our DSO implementation plan, or the DSO roadmap. So this basically shows between now and 2030 what the different networks are doing, or the different networks have planned to progress the transition to DSO. So it's quite a useful resource for us, and it's quite a user-friendly tool as well. I think we've included a link in the slides for that. It basically like shows how we're going to be delivering DSO between now and 2030. And then finally, we have um, another area of work that's starting to look at whole energy systems. So this is a relatively newer area of work for us in the project, and we're basically working with our gas counterparts in distribution and starting to look at how we can kind of, improve processes through more coordination with the GDN. So we've got some of the products here. I think one of the new areas of work that we're starting to explore is to look at how, the electricity networks and the gas networks can work more closely together to help inform local area energy planning. And then finally, we've got, so in all of the work that we do, we recognize the importance of stakeholder engagement. So I think that's one of the fundamental principles for the project. We want to make sure that as we progress in this transition, we're taking everybody with us in that journey. So there are a few different forums and mechanisms that we use to engage with stakeholders. So firstly, we've set up something that we call our advisory group panel. So this has over 45 different representatives from the wider energy industry, and we meet with them every 2 months to present our work and get their input and feedback on it. Something else that we've also started to look at this year is creating user forums. So user forums are essentially basically groups that we're forming um, with external stakeholders, non-network representatives. We're bringing them together and helping us in our development work. So we're setting up two of them, one of them in our flexibility services work, and another one in our whole energy systems work. So we will basically be kicking these off in the next couple of months, and we'll be looking to work with the stakeholders more closely in the initial development process. In the project, we also have a number of public consultations. So we've got 3 that are planned for this year. So one of the key ones to flag is the one on flexibility. So each year what we do is we consult on all of the work that we do in our flexibility work stream, and that consultation is coming up in July. So as part of that, all the 9 products that I mentioned on the slide earlier, we'll be seeking industry views on that. And then alongside all of these other things, what we also do is from time to time we host a number of workshops, events with wider audiences. And then over the last couple of years, we've also started to host dedicated sessions with community energy, with energy group, to help bring their input into the project. I've included a link here to our events page. So I think that shows all the different events that we have going on in the project. So I think that's all from me. So at this point, I will hand over to Randolph to talk about the wider view on flexibility across the UK.
Thanks, Farina. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you.
Brilliant. All right. Okay, thanks, Farina, and good evening, everyone. My name's Randolph. I'm Director of Innovation and Electricity Systems at ENA in the UK. I work with Farina on open networks, resilience, innovation, low carbon technologies, and also our engineering team at ENA. But a big part of my work is around effectively looking at the future of the electricity networks and how we can transition them to a smart grid to help support net zero. I do apologise in advance if there's any loud cracks in the background. There's been quite a lot of thunder and lightning in London this evening, so apologies if you see any flashes or loud sounds. So Farina gave a really good overview of the Open Networks project and the different work streams, and I'm going to drill down a little bit more into flexibility and flexibility markets, and in particular local flexibility markets, which is probably a key aspect of what we're doing here in the UK that's pretty new and we think fairly world leading. So in terms of different energy markets in GB, I've put a pretty simplified diagram up here, but we think about it as having these national markets for wholesale energy trading, balancing and ancillary services, effectively helping to maintain frequency and relieve congestion at a high voltage level, transmission level, and also a capacity market in the UK. And for quite a few of these markets, particularly balancing and ancillary services, they are run by Great Britain's TSO, which is called National Grid Electricity System Operator, and they are one of our members. And a lot of change is happening in these national markets. Although the markets themselves have been around for quite a while, they are changing shape, the services are changing, and the people providing those services are also changing. So historically, this would have been, particularly on the balancing and ancillary services side, it would have been less than 100 large-scale fossil fuel or nuclear-powered generators. But now, as we have more uptake of DER, a lot of smaller units are providing those services to the ESO. If I say the ESO, I mean effectively the TSO in Great Britain. And I think we're down now to, for a lot of those services, we're down to a megawatt, but the direction of travel is that in the future, even household devices could help contribute towards some of those services, probably aggregated, of course. So those services and the ESO is a part of the Open Networks project, but it's probably not one of the key aspects of the Open Networks project. What we more focus on is the interface between those markets and the newer markets that are happening at the distribution level. So as you can see there at distribution, we're effectively looking at congestion on the distribution networks and how we can use a market-based solution to relieve congestion. And the congestion at the moment at least, we kind of think of it as two different types of congestion, effectively real power and reactive power. Real power, as I'll explain in a minute, is very well established. These markets have been around for a couple of years now. Reactive power is emerging. There's also other services and other markets that we're looking at a distribution level that they're not really at the sort of business as usual stage yet, like the congestion management markets, but they are in trial. So for example, we're looking at services for harmonic suppression, black start from distributed energy resources, peer-to-peer trading, as you can see on the screen there, and a few other areas. So it's not just congestion management that we're looking at, but that is the key focus for now anyway. So those two orange boxes are what we're sort of focusing on with the Open Networks project, as well as the interface between those local markets and those national markets. As you'll see in a minute, it's a key principle of ours that providers of services from DER can stack value or can access multiple revenue from different markets. That is one of our key principles, because at the end of the day, these local DNO markets are just not they're not that valuable. No one's going to build an asset just to provide DNO services, or it's very unlikely. And then the only other thing to note is that what we're talking about when I'm talking about these markets is explicit flexibility. So this is where the networks are procuring some sort of service explicitly, but our regulator, in collaboration with our members, is also looking at what we call implicit flexibility. So this is where we can effectively change the price signals of using the networks to try and entice flexibility on or off, or up or down, to help support networks as well. That is slightly less well established, and I would say we're still unclear as to how much response there'll be from purely price-driven charges, but we'll see. And we think in the future that this explicit flexibility and implicit flexibility will work hand in hand. So could we go to the next slide, please? I think Farina. Yeah, thank you very much. So the first thing we did when we ran all the trials, right? I'm not going to really talk too much about the trials today, but we ran a bunch of trials over a number of years to test how flexibility would work technically, how it could work commercially, what markets would look like, best practice for markets, etc. But once we were sort of confident that it worked and that there was a potential market there for it, all of our networks in Great Britain across transmission and distribution made a flexibility commitment. I think it was in late 2018. And effectively, what that commitment said is that where we have significant congestion in the networks, we will test the market to see if the market can provide that flexibility. And if they can provide that flexibility at a lower cost than what the traditional network solution would have been, typically building more network, then they committed to procuring that flexibility to relieve that congestion. And there were a range of different steps that we agreed as a part of that commitment, which I'm going to talk about in a bit, to effectively give confidence to the market that this is a new type of service that we will be procuring and that it's here to stay, and that you will be able to stack this as a part of the revenue stream for your asset or asset. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. So what does it mean in terms of actual size? So I think the first thing to note is that this slide is more or less out of date every time I update it. These local flexibility markets for distribution networks are now business as usual in Great Britain, and actually now the UK, Northern Ireland, has also just launched its first local flexibility tender. And our members are running these tenders throughout the year. If you were to add up the 4 real power services, you would get around 2.9 gigawatts. I think it's over 2.9 gigawatts now if you include the latest updates in Northern Ireland as well. You probably shouldn't add those services up because they're not always necessarily mutually exclusive, but that, hey ho, that's what people do to describe the size of the market. But as you can see in the box on the right-hand side there are 4 real power products that are now standardized across the country and that our members are procuring in various volumes. Effectively, they represent normal operation when you have a constraint, pre-fault and post-fault constraint management, and long-term restoration where you might have a long-term fault or you might have an outage during summer, for example, and you might need some support. As you can see in the table, I realize it's a bit small. All these figures are available on our website, by the way. The figures vary. They vary per product. We've also got on the website, this is broken down by network and location, etc. But as you can see in the rows, the numbers are increasing over time. So we're effectively what this means is we're putting more and more out to tender, and we're contracting more and more flexibility services as time goes on. And for the eagle-eyed, you'll notice that there's actually a fifth column there, which is a reactive power. We've not standardized products for reactive power yet at distribution in the country, but we are starting to dabble in this. And you can see that a few of the tenders are starting to procure and look at reactive power support for distribution networks, because voltage is becoming an increasing problem at distribution as well. I'll talk about why there's a difference between what's tendered and what's contracted and what that difference could be in a couple of slides' time. But I also wanted to just quickly note on this slide that we've got a roadmap which is demonstrating how we're delivering the sort of various steps in the customer journey for providing flexibility. So if we just go on to the next slide, I'll talk about these steps. When we think of flexibility and trying to create a market for flexibility, what does that actually mean? Well, we think of it in terms of the steps that a customer would take in the journey of providing flexibility. So you see here, we think about everything from the upfront, definitions and forecasting what we need, how we actually make that information visible. So how we effectively put our needs out there and make them easy to access and easy to see, so that people, and over time as well, so that people have confidence that there is a need there and that there is a market there. We then look at what the procurement process and selection is and how we can make that simple, easy to understand, quick for customers. And I'll talk a bit more in a minute about how we do that. What happens when you actually go to dispatch the stuff? What are the standards? What are the communications protocols? What are the requirements? How do you dispatch? Do you just get an email and you respond, or is it an automatic signal? Then obviously the settlement. So how do we measure that people have provided what they actually said they would provide? And then across all of those steps, it's about reporting back on what we've done, how we've done it, when we've done it, where we've done it, being very clear and open about what we're doing. The reason we called the project the Open Network Project is very much because we want everything to be open and transparent, because to drive confidence and liquidity in these markets, you need to be very open and transparent about what you're doing so that people want to participate and can trust networks. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. So as you would have seen on that previous table, there was a difference between what we've put out to tender over the years and what we've actually contracted. It started off pretty low. We probably only contracted about 20 to 25% of what we wanted. And I think last year, off the top of my head, it was somewhere between 50 and 60% of what we put out to tender we actually contracted. And what I mean by contracted is, I mean a signed legal contract to provide that service. On our website, you also have the stats on there around how often the assets were called upon, so what the utilization was, etc. But that difference between what was tendered and what was actually contracted is quite important, because that gives you an idea of how liquid the market is. And the fact that we're not contracting all we want indicates to us that we still need to increase the liquidity in these markets. And it's completely different across the country. In some areas, we get nothing. We get nothing of what we put out to tender. In other areas, we get more than 100% of what we want, sometimes 200% of what we want. So it's highly locational. Most of these markets are happening at either 33 kV or 11 kV, but we're actually even studying low voltage markets as well. So, that could be like an individual block in London, for example. So the market is increasing, but we're not getting all we need. So we're doing a range of different things to try and boost this liquidity. And liquidity doesn't just boost the amount of providers, but it also drives costs down, as you can probably imagine. So we're looking at innovation trials. I'll talk more about this on the next slide. We've got the common products now, and the common products made a huge difference. So we've got the common real power products, but we still need to look at the common reactive power products. Better visibility and ease of access. Originally, we just posted things in a spreadsheet, just a table of postcodes. Now we're going to way more interesting, interactive maps, easy to understand maps where you can download the data. You have sort of machine-to-machine interfaces, etc. Standardized contractual terms. We've now created one common contract for distribution networks in the UK, in GB, in terms of flexibility services. And the next stage is to extend that to ESO, effectively ESO congestion management as well. Removing exclusivity, very important. Like I said, DNO flex markets are not that valuable in the big scheme of things anyway. So it's very unlikely that someone's going to be building an asset purely to provide DNO services. So they need to access other revenue streams from other markets. So we need to make sure we're not being exclusive as far as technically possible. Obviously, sometimes you can't provide two services at the same time. Consistent reporting and monitoring, I think I've talked about. Lowering barriers to entry in terms of size. So as I said, I think ESO, I could be wrong, but I think the ESO is down to around 1 megawatt now. And the DNOs, it kind of varies a little bit across the country, but I know that we broke a record recently for the smallest asset providing a service, which was very much the exception other than the rule, but it was 600 watts. So it just sort of shows what the art of the possible is. Coordination with the TSO, or as we call it, the ESO and wider energy markets, are absolutely critical to enabling that stacking. Open data I've talked about, but probably the least tangible one, but the most important one is in bold at the bottom, which is around stakeholder management. These sorts of sessions where we do similar sorts of sessions to these with all providers of different energy services in the UK, and trying to drive awareness, understanding of the markets, confidence in the markets is critical to driving that trust and increasing the liquidity. Just quickly on to the next slide, please. Thanks, Farina. I don't have time to go through all of our innovation trials today, but like I said, we've had a lot of trials previously that helped us before we got to business as usual. And we've got ongoing trials for the services that are less standardized. So like I said, we're looking at, there's harmonics, black start from DER. We're looking at rebalancing, because at the moment, any imbalance caused by these flex services, we effectively don't rebalance it from a frequency perspective. There's peer-to-peer trading, a whole bunch of different innovation trials that we're looking at to help grow these markets, coordinate them, etc. And you can learn about all of them on our Smarter Networks portal, the link of which is on the screen there. So I think there's one more slide with links, which will obviously, or hopefully ESA can send out afterwards. Like I said, open networks, we called it open networks for a reason. Everything's publicly available on our website, including all the stats, all the figures, videos, interesting, cool videos and stuff. And we also really welcome feedback. Not just from within the UK, we welcome feedback from all over the world, because we don't think we've done it all perfectly, and we're constantly learning. All of what Farina and I have described today has changed over the years. We're constantly iterating and changing to make things better. So we really welcome feedback. Or even if you're just interested in following our progress, please join our mailing list. The link is on the screen there. You can also reach out directly to Farina and I. You can get our contact details from ESIG, I'm sure, or LinkedIn, etc. But yeah, really, really hope you enjoyed that. Thank you very much for listening. And I've been keeping a cheeky eye on the questions, and I see quite a few have come through. So looking forward to the Q&A session as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Randolph and Farina. I'm going to start off with just a question that's not in the Slido there. It's just a little bit of overview perspective question. How does what you're doing in GB compare with other things that are going on in Europe? Are there other such similar activities, or is this kind of groundbreaking, leading the way? Where do you fit in the bigger landscape?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's an EU policy which basically it's called the Clean Energy Package. Well, that's not the official term. I think that's the unofficial term. But yeah, the Clean Energy Package, which basically says that networks should be investigating flexibility and using flexibility where it makes sense from a security and economic perspective to do so. So all of the networks in Europe are moving towards these local smart grids and local flexibility markets. However, I will say that some of them are moving quicker than others, I would say. I'd say that we're probably in the front wave, the early movers, along with probably the Netherlands in particular, and also I think Norway. And then you've got other countries like France, which are quickly catching up as well. But I think it's fair to say that we are probably at the front of the wave. I don't think there's too many people ahead of us, certainly in terms of the size of the markets. We've definitely not nailed everything. Like, for example, network charging arrangements, we're not at the front of the curve on that sort of thing. But in terms of the explicit local flex markets, yeah, we're probably at the front of the curve.
Okay. Thank you, Randolph. Let's take a few questions from the Slido here. One from Mark O'Malley. Why are you trying to reduce flexible connections and active network management contracts? Is it a move to a market solution as opposed to a contract one?
Very good question, Mark. So flexible connections and active network management, which is effectively means that when you connect to the network, you agree that your connection will not be firm. There will be certain periods during the year where you will be turned off or you have to reduce your output. But that would have meant that you probably up front got a cheaper connection by signing up to one of those schemes. They have been very successful. They've enabled a huge amount of renewables to connect to the grid in the country. However, there's arguments for whether they're a true market solution or not, because although you did get the upfront compensation by effectively getting a cheaper connection, the actions for during the year when you get curtailed somewhat is effectively uncompensated. So it's low cost for networks to activate that, but there's an argument and a debate from third-party flexibility providers that it's not a true market, particularly if you're in a region where you basically don't have a choice and you effectively have to sign up to one of these. I think the other thing to note is that the way that the charging regime is set up in the UK is such that there can be significant upfront connection costs because you don't just pay for your immediate connection, but also wider network reinforcement. And there's a question and a debate happening with the regulator as to whether some of that could be put to a flexibility market in the future.
Okay, thank you. Another one from Mark there. I'm sorry, go ahead, Farina.
So I was just going to add to that by saying, I think, we've had quite a lot of feedback from stakeholders on this in the past. And I think another aspect that stakeholders are a bit concerned about is if they have a flexible connection, they're not necessarily always able to participate in the flexibility markets. So I think, some of the services, I think particularly some of the national services, there are clauses that might not allow them to participate. So we're basically through the work in open networks, we're looking at how we can basically kind of provide them more information so they've got more certainty on what kind of curtailments coming their way, but also we're trying to look at contracts and see whether or not we can free them of some of the obligations where it might be possible to do so.
Okay. Thank you. And the next question, the assumption for implicitly allowing stacking is that by stacking, you can make it worthwhile. Is there analysis, and are you sure you are not double counting? The old double counting question.
Well, I mean, we're definitely not double counting because this is a new revenue stream. So DNOs have never procured this service before. They've never paid people for this service. So it's basically a new service. I think there is a question as to whether you should get paid twice to provide the same service, or provide the same, let's call it the same movement in your connection, whether it's up or down. I think that is still open for debate. There's a debate between the economists and the regulators and the engineers on that as to whether you should get twice or not for providing the same shift in your output. I think my old economics professor has a very different view to the regulator. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Farina, anything to add?
Not in this one.
Okay. The next one there is, are all of the 2.9 gigawatts of local flexibility services avoiding traditional network reinforcements?
I would say most, but not all. So some of it is replacing like restoration services, which is where we would send diesel generators out somewhere to provide power for a certain period of time for various reasons. But it's true to say that most of it is avoiding reinforcement, whether that's due to normal operating conditions and normal constraints associated with that, or for situations in terms of N-1 security and situations like that. I know where that question's coming from, and it's driven by the regulation in the UK. The regulation in the UK is such that the networks get incentivized to find the lowest cost solution for releasing capacity to customers. And if that solution is using a third-party flexibility service instead of a additional network asset build solution, the networks are actually incentivized to choose the cheaper solution. And if that's the flexibility service, they will use that because they're incentivized to do that. It makes economic sense for them to do that. That's the big difference with the UK versus most other regulatory models. Most other regulatory models, the network is incentivized effectively to build more network. But in the UK, it's output focused. So it's about the capacity released, not the solution you choose to release the capacity, if that makes sense.
Okay. Question here from Mike Hogan. What's the status of desensitizing the DER loss of mains protection, which was a contributing factor to the August 2019 event? That's a flexibility issue, is it not?
It is a flexibility issue. That's not part of the Open Networks project, but someone else in my team looks at that. So we are going through a program called the Accelerated Loss of Mains program, which is effectively looking at doing exactly what Mike says, desensitizing protection, mainly vector shift protection and rock-off protection on particularly renewable DER. A lot of stuff that's inverter connected, so it's a lot of solar, for example. We're effectively going through a process of working down the different sizes of those installations to desensitize their protection. Typically means turning vector shift off or lowering the rock-off sensitivity. It's going well. We are sort of, like I said, we started with the bigger units. So we started with solar farms and wind farms that are in the sort of tens of megawatts, and then we went down to the things sort of under 10 megawatts down to 1 megawatt. Now we're sort of at the stage where we're going for the smaller stuff. It's a little bit, as you go down to the smaller installations, it obviously gets trickier. Sometimes you don't even know where the sites are or who the customers are, but it has been quite successful, and we're doing a revised marketing push on that at the moment, because we are effectively paying people to do the desensitization and helping them to change their protection settings. But it's not really related to the local flexibility markets. It's more about helping the National Grid ESO maintain frequency and not have our national frequency so sensitive under times of stress, effectively trying to increase inertia somewhat.
Yeah, it can be an expensive, time-consuming process changing all those settings.
It's not easy. It's difficult. That's why we started with the big stuff, right? You want to get the big ones done first, and then work your way down to the small one.
And that's kind of leads into the next question from David Jacobson. Of the 30 gigawatts in DER, how much is fully observable and controllable versus small behind-the-meter DER, which may not be observable and controllable by the DNO? I would elaborate on that just a little bit, Randolph and Farina, to ask a related question about the costs of the communication and control, the costs and the interconnection requirements. Do you have any breakpoints where you must have communication and control or not? But going back to David's question.
Yeah, so of that 30 gigawatts, roughly 85% off the top of my head is renewable. So it's mainly wind and solar. In terms of controllable, well, we have, like I said, we have some on those active network management and flexible connection arrangements. And I would have to check the latest stats on that, but it's probably somewhere between, Farina, correct me if I'm wrong, somewhere between 4 and 8 gigawatts last time I checked. I've got 7 or something like that in my head, which is effectively on an active network management solution. The rest is not. In terms of what's observable, well, you don't really know what's not there or hasn't told you it's there. However, to give you a bit of an idea, we estimate that we've got visibility of somewhere between 70 and 80% of solar PV, less than 50% of electric vehicles, and less than 20% of heat pumps and CHPs. So yeah, take of that what you will, but basically it's our visibility is not great, let's put it that way.
Okay. And interconnection requirements, what do they say about communications and control equipment as a function of size or type, anything?
That's effectively what we're looking at in open networks when I was talking about that dispatch area. We don't really have agreed standards on that yet in the UK. It's a little bit, it's dependent on the local DNO and what they're using for their DERM systems.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, another question from Mike Hogan there on nodal pricing. Why not move to nodal pricing, which is in fact the market-based resolution of congestion used in North America and soon in Australia?
Yeah, I mean, $1 million question. I wish our regulator was here to answer that one. I honestly, like I said, this is something the regulator's looking at in terms of network charging and pricing arrangements. It's why don't we move to it? I think that there's pros and cons, and the regulator's very aware of fairness as well and who's paying for what. But I think that's not really a question that we can answer. I've got personal views on it, but from an E&A perspective, we don't really set the pricing arrangements. We take that guidance from our regulator.
Okay, fair enough. I'm going to go off Slido for a moment there. and ask a question that popped up while you were talking about the whole energy system joint planning between the gas and the electric networks. I think that's a very forward-looking thing, and I'm just curious if there's any examples of that that's already been done, or just where it stands in the planning and implementation thought process.
Quite
So
happy
do you want to take some of those, Farina?
yeah, quite happy to cover that. Yeah, so I think as recent example of something that we've done in the whole energy system space is basically like we've developed a whole system CBA framework. So this is something that hasn't existed in the past in the UK. So it basically like it's a framework that allows you to assess, like when you've got a particular network issue, you can assess, or when you've got a particular need for a particular area, you can assess electricity solutions against gas solutions and potentially other vectors as well. So that framework and that methodology gives you a bit of a set process to help understand what the best solution might be on a whole system basis. So that's the first of its kind in the UK, and that's something that we have developed under the Open Networks project. So that's something that the regulators also now endorsed. So the expectation for the network companies going forward would be to use that to come and kind of demonstrate whole system benefits for projects that kind of span across different vectors.
We're also looking at the operation of the networks. In the UK, when we have an electricity peak, we'll typically have a gas peak at the same time. Might be the same in the US. So there's ways that we could better operate the two networks in unison when they have historically been operated quite independently and quite siloed.
Okay. And Randolph, I guess both you and Farina mentioned the peer-to-peer trading within the Open Networks framework. That's a very interesting idea too. I think we're not very far down the road on that. We're a lot of discussion of it. Where does your thinking stand on the peer-to-peer trading?
I would say it's an interesting concept. How realistic it is, though, is, I would say, still open for debate. There's going to be no residential customers trading with their neighbor. I mean, there might be, but there's not going to be many of them doing that. It might make sense where you've got aggregators who are maybe working together, but I think it's an interesting concept, but I'm yet to be convinced that it will be a real prospect, put it that way.
Okay. I'm going to jump around a little bit here. There's a lot of interesting questions there that we're not going to get to, but hopefully we'll get answers afterwards. One of those is on cybersecurity. How are you managing cybersecurity with DERs, and do you impose the same level of cybersecurity standards as you would for a large generator?
So, yeah, just to note up front, I'm not a cybersecurity expert, but someone in the team is. But we have a cybersecurity working group, which comprises all of our members as well as government and other relevant cyber authorities. They are looking at standards and best practice for cybersecurity when it comes to DER. I honestly can't answer the question as to whether it's the same for large or small units, but what I will say is one of the biggest risks that our ESO has identified is that if all of the smaller assets, so let's use, for example, electric vehicle charge points, if they were all using the same standard, the same interface, and the same control system, for example, it means that they could all be accessed and turned up or down or off or on at the same time, which would pose significant swings in frequency, obviously, potentially. So that is a big and credible risk to them, and hence that's the sort of thing that group's investigating. but I'm not an expert on cybersecurity. If someone does want to learn a bit more about that, Chamath, I think looks like the question's there, do reach out to us and I can hook you up with our cybersecurity lead at ENA.
Okay, it is a popular topic on a lot of people's minds these days, as you know, I'm sure, because of different events taking place around the world, including here. Okay, so we're about at the top of the hour. We're going to need to wrap it up. I want to thank Farina and Randolph for this really helpful look at the Open Networks project and GB. And I hope everyone was able to take away something from it. I know I certainly was. And as I mentioned earlier, an email will go out once the video file has been posted, and we'll do our best to answer the questions we couldn't get to and get the answers posted as quickly as possible. We appreciate your engagement and look forward to seeing you again soon at our webinar on market design for the clean electricity transition at 4 p.m. Eastern on Thursday, May 26th, or one of our upcoming meteorology and markets workshop sessions in June. We hope you'll be able to join us once again for one of these events. Further information on all of our webinars and meetings can be found on our website at esig.energy under events, and in our newsletters and informational emails, and you're all invited to attend. Farina and Randolph, again, thank you for this very timely and informative webinar, and thank all of you for your interest. We look forward to seeing you again in the near future. And in the meantime, everyone, take care, stay safe, and thanks for your participation. See you soon.